Well, let me tell you just a little bit about Dr. Marvin Olasky. As you may know, Dr. Olasky is the inaugural holder of Patrick Henry College's Distinguished Chair in Journalism and Public Policy. He also serves as professor of journalism at the college and continues to serve as editor-in-chief of World Magazine. We're excited to have this great collaboration with Marvin Olasky and with World. It's a blessing to have him here because, as you know, he's an accomplished journalist and scholar, academic leader who's authored more than 20 books and hundreds of articles for national publications on topics like journalism, history, media, public policy, the intersection of Christianity and culture. Two of his books were especially influential: The Tragedy of American Compassion and Compassionate Conservatism. These books played an important role in the struggle for welfare reform for the poor during the 1990s. You may recall President George W. Bush praised Marvin as compassionate conservatism's leading thinker. We're also delighted to welcome, along with Marvin, his wife Susan Olasky, who's joining us as an assistant professor of government and public policy, and writer in residence, I might add. The couple has 4 grown sons, and although they will continue to live in Asheville, North Carolina, they'll frequently be here on the Patrick Henry College campus. We're delighted to have him here, and Dr. Ferris will tell you about the interviewee. Okay.
Thank you for coming today. We're really thrilled to have this interview here. Senator Jim DeMint is, without too much quarrel, the most principled member of the United States Senate. He has led the charge on a lot of areas that are widely acknowledged. He is the leading advocate for the American taxpayer. He is saving us billions of dollars every time he gets a chance, and I'm sure that he'll have a lot to say about that today. But I also wanted to trumpet a couple of areas of his leadership that is not as widely acknowledged. Senator DeMint is the lead sponsor of a resolution opposing the ratification of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Senator DeMint believes in a very basic idea. Americans should make the law for America. And that novel idea is not shared by the President. It's not shared by other members of the Senate, particularly Senator Barbara Boxer and our Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. But his leadership has produced more than enough co-sponsors of that resolution that for all practical purposes, that treaty is dead until there's another election, and then we'll have to do it again. So we're really proud of his leadership on that particular issue. He's also the lead sponsor on the Parental Rights Amendment because he believes that parents, not government, should be making decisions for their kids. In virtually every area of life, government does have a role as a backup, but the presumptions, the legal presumptions need to be that fit parents make decisions for their kids. Senator DeMint is leading the charge for the American family, for American sovereignty, and the American taxpayer. That's a pretty good trio of leadership. It is my privilege that he is the one to lead off this series here at Patrick Henry College. Senator Jim DeMint.
Well, Senator, let's start out with a couple of questions about your life as a teenager.
Oh, no, you can't go past 21.
Well, we'll go back a few years before
okay,
that.
All right.
I love the name that your mom gave to the dance studio she ran, the DeMint Academy of Dance and Decorum.
Decorum, right.
Okay, so going back to those times you don't want me to ask about, was there more dance or decorum in your life?
In my life?
In your life.
There wasn't a lot of decorum. Frankly, my mother's 4 children, I constantly embarrassed her on that point since she was teaching young people as well as adults things such as opening the door for a lady, teaching us to play bridge, you know, how to speak in a courteous fashion. So it was actually pretty novel at the time to do that. And no, but there was ballroom dancing. Okay. And you know, the foxtrot and the waltz, the things you don't see as much anymore, but we did a little of all of it, I guess.
Okay, very, very cool. Now, when you were in a band, this is in your upper teenage years, around 20 or so?
Yeah, I actually started in middle school. I had a paper route and saved the money to buy a set of drums. Okay. And we started playing in a band in the 9th grade and a bigger band in college, and we actually played first couple of years, a bigger band in high school, and then we kept playing a little bit in college.
Okay, and the band, as I understand it, was called Salt and Pepper because
Right.
it was both whites and blacks.
Right, which was
is
unusual at the
Yeah.
time. This was during integration. Integration actually really helped us because we got a good saxophone player and a good trumpet player, and it expanded our band, and we were actually pretty good for just a local band. We had as many as 8 people, depending on who could get off and go play. So it was a lot of fun. I think that's probably the most fun I had in high school.
And what did you learn from that rare experience of integration in a time when there was still lots of hostility?
Well, fortunately, we were at a place where it was not noticed as much.
Okay.
I mean, what I think while we saw on TV tensions around the country, for where we were, it happened pretty inconspicuously. And so what I learned from that is that we had a lot of similar interest, and it was an opportunity for all of us. And for the most part, it was very smooth and welcomed in the part of the country I was.
Okay. Now, let me jump forward a little bit, because I believe you had your 60th birthday about 3 weeks ago?
Yes, I did. You had to bring that up.
I had to bring that up.
It makes me feel tired just to mention it. Yeah.
Because I'm wondering, last time I interviewed you, which was a couple of years ago, you mentioned there was about 30 when you became a Christian. You were about 30 at that point?
Actually 25.
Oh,
Yeah.
25, okay. So 35 years since then.
Mm-hmm.
When you became a Christian, what changed in your life?
Well, a lot of things over time, and I think like a lot of people, I got really into it. I got interested. I got over involved in the church. I was a deacon and elders, school board, taught Sunday school. I was chairman of the local Christian Businessmen Committee. I got over involved, and I think it took a little of the joy out of it. I think over time, I've come to I think really enjoy and value the personal relationship with Jesus and what that means, not so much the form of being a Christian. And learning that difference over time and really just having joy in His presence, that's what's changed over a longer period of time, where there's actually freedom and peace in that relationship and not so much a set of rules, which for me, going from being a non-Christian in a time of the pretty much, I grew up in the 60s and early 70s, and a lot changed in our culture. And so for me, it was a pretty drastic change, and I was, I guess you would say, maybe too strict in a sense, although I probably needed a few years of being too strict just to kind of straighten the path. But over time, particularly as I look back over my shoulder at my life, so many times in my life when I thought I was on the long train to nowhere, that there was no plan, and I wondered where God was, I saw, He was always preparing me for something I had no expectation of doing, particularly what I'm doing now.
Well, how did you get to that point with what you're doing now? Because for a long time, you were in marketing, you had your own marketing firm, and certainly there's a lot of marketing in politics. There's a lot of marketing, in fact, when it comes to churches. What do you see as a Christian? What do you see as the positives of marketing? What do you see as the negatives? How do you get at that?
Well, marketing is meeting people's needs with your product or service, and the whole process of marketing is understanding what those needs are and trying to fulfill them in a positive way. In a very competitive environment, try to fulfill them better than someone else at a lower price and higher quality. And so a lot of life is that way. And I think in our walk in faith, is understanding others, what their needs are, trying to serve them, is not unlike a lot of what you try to do in marketing. And it should be the point of politics, is to understand needs, serve needs, except for, I think that may be where we have problems here, of folks who come to Washington and want to do good with other people's money. That is really not the mission of the federal government. While hopefully what we do results in good, the whole point of the federal government is very limited and we're supposed to stick to that. But I think because of good intentions, many of us are trying to do good things with the government, creating a whole host of unintended consequences, as you've written about a lot. But getting back to your question of marketing, there's a lot of a relationship and with marketing, with life, with Christianity, with politics. But the power in marketing is the idea, the new idea, the different idea. And that, to me, is what drove me to run for public office, is believing that ideas would trump the political establishment. And that's been a very difficult thing to make happen. I came to Washington in my first couple of years. I was considered a policy nerd. I spent a lot of time developing a Social Security reform proposal, a tax reform proposal, health care reform. But then I realized that even a lot of folks in my own party were not here to actually implement the ideas they talked about in their campaigns. They were here to get reelected, to take home the bacon, other things that I didn't see as a part of why I was here.
Well, let me ask you about a couple of these things. Healthcare reform. Mm-hmm. When Republicans had a majority in Congress, not much happened.
No.
And that opened the door for the Democratic policies. Why didn't things happen then? What are the tides and currents in the Republican Party that we should all know about, which might explain why things didn't happen?
Well, I think you've got to understand the different worldviews in Washington. It's not necessarily by party lines, but to a large degree, it is. There's one worldview that is mine, that America is a bottom-up institution, that it works when millions of people are making their own decisions about what they want to do and what they value. That's what creates entrepreneurs and innovators and free thinkers, and that's what really builds our economy, is an individual taking risk in hopes of a financial reward. Okay. And the other worldview is more of a top-down European central planning type of view, is that we direct the economy from a central point here in Washington. And there are a lot of people with all good intentions who believe that works. If you listen to the debate that goes on now about our economy, I mean, there's some who really believe that you spend more from government. You direct the spending to a solar company or something. You decide the winners and losers. That is the mindset, the worldview of a lot of people here. But what I think we had a problem in the Republican Party is there were folks who maybe just did not understand that view, some who were more just politically minded, who were here to get reelected. It was very difficult to do comprehensive policy. The easy thing to do in Congress is to get earmarks and take home the bacon and get a good press release that, you know, DeMint is working for the people of South Carolina. Right. He got $1 million for this bridge. The work of actually developing legislation, getting all the actuaries to help you work it out and devise the legislation and then get co-sponsors, it's a lot of work and it's frustrating. But I did find that my own party was not nearly as anxious as I'd hoped to sign up for a health reform proposal, because my whole goal gets at what you said. The fact that we didn't do anything led the government to do too much. And there were a lot of proposals, but the goal was to have every American have access to a health plan that they could afford and own and keep. And there were a lot of things that we could do that didn't cost taxpayer money, that would make those plans more available, more affordable, more competitive. But we just didn't push it. Admittedly, we never had 60 votes in the Senate, and the reality was it would have been very difficult to get it through. But the hard thing to accept is there are a lot of people in Congress who do not want individuals to own their own health insurance.
Including Republicans?
I think there are very few of those left.
Okay.
We've been weeding them out, but I don't think there's a Republican who would say they don't want it. But I think there are some who may say that's unrealistic, it would never work. But I know it would. And that's the way America should work, is individuals should have the responsibility and the opportunity to have their own health insurance and to be in control of their own health care. And to go the other way for the government to control, it's just a completely different paradigm.
So if Republicans, let's say, were to gain the White House in the next election and have a majority in Congress, along with repealing Obamacare, what would come in its place? Is there enough of a consensus to try to...
I think there is, because as we began as Republicans to try to stop Obamacare, I think a consensus developed of things that have been talked about and worked on for years. Just interstate competition between insurance companies. I mean, it's crazy to have just a 50-state patchwork of insurance monopolies, when if I found a better policy in Arizona that was cheaper and just what I wanted, why shouldn't I be able to buy it? So I think interstate competition is important. Now, a lot of the large insurance companies will fight that. That's one of the problems in the Republican Party, is folks didn't want to do it. But if companies can deduct health insurance, let individuals deduct it from their taxes. Why not let small companies, associations, churches come together and buy health plans that their members can have? I mean, the fact that there are people in Congress, and this was, I think, completely the Democrat Party, would not let small businesses come together and buy health insurance as inexpensively as others. And to make plans portable so that if you work for someone, you can own your own plan and take it to the next employer. And the biggest thing is to have a situation, and similar to what Paul Ryan recommended, is when you retire that you can keep your health insurance, and that you can either take a government Medicare plan, or Medicare will provide a premium subsidy so you can keep your own plan. And the reason to get the subsidy is you've paid for it your whole life. Every paycheck, 2.5% comes out for Medicare. But if you could keep your policy your whole life, what would happen is the insurance companies would begin to sell whole life health insurance instead of the term policies we have now, which are never intended to take you past your next job. But if you could do that, I could be buying at a lower price policies for my grandchildren today, because that would create a real product of value for them their whole life.
So would you advise Republicans in this coming election to say honestly, yeah, we messed up last time, we didn't take action on health care, but it's going to be different this time?
Yeah, we have to re-earn the trust. I think we have to admit we betrayed that trust. We didn't reform our tax code. And frankly, we had several proposals. It was hard to get a lot of Republicans to sign up for those proposals. So we didn't have the critical mass, even of Republicans, to try to push it through. The same with Social Security reform, to create those personal plans, because everyone was so afraid of privatization and what the media would hit us with. But if you believe there's a trust fund, just go back a few months ago when the president said, I may not be able to send out checks unless I can borrow more money. That should tell you what's really in the trust fund.
Right. Now, I saw on your blog last week, which is interesting to look at, by the way, Jim's blog on your senatorial website, that you referred to venture socialism. The expression has been around crony capitalism,
right,
pretty much meaning the same thing. And I think you were alluding before to things like the Solyndra.
Right.
Maybe you could explain that. And here's something that we certainly see the Obama administration, but we see Republicans also engaging in venture socialism or crony capitalism. What's the problem with that, and how would you stop that?
Well, when the government starts picking winners and losers, and we do that in a lot of different ways, even with our tax codes and the tax credits, and if you do certain things, you can get money from government. If you give political contributions, you can apparently get a lot of money from government. But one of the first rules of free market economics is that the private sector is going to allocate resources better than the government. And the market forces are actually much more honest in the way they work, and they will screen out those companies that don't have good products or business plans. But what happens if just like with the green plans that the president has, he's stuffing money in the pockets of different solar companies and wind generating companies. But if you talk to people who've been in the solar business for a while, they'll tell you that they can make this industry grow and do well if the government will stop playing in it. But if you're competing and suddenly the government comes in and gives your competitor a large amount of money, and this happens often. I've talked to companies that spend millions of dollars laying cable for broadband in rural areas, and then a competitor will get a grant and come in and compete with them. But the government can't pick winners and losers and have a good outcome. And when we do start doing that, it creates uncertainty, which restricts investment. And we're seeing that a lot in the country today, is people are afraid to go out there because they don't know what the government's going to do to them or give to a competitor. It's not a good environment for a rule of law country. That's what makes us successful, is there is a predictable framework that you can manage your risk. And this administration has made things much, much worse.
Well, and the argument is that the administration stimulus bills and all sorts of things to try to create more jobs. Obviously, that's not working. But I suspect there's a lot of public suspicion about Republicans. Well, how are you going to do anything better? So what would you do on jobs?
Well, several things are pretty easy. I've been talking to businesses over the last month during our August break. And so I've talked to dozens of them, visited plants. We've got to put a moratorium on the regulations. There are hundreds of new rules coming out of this administration every month. They're proposed rules, and companies don't know what to think. You can talk to banks. They don't know if they can expand or open branches because there are 3 regulators for every bank in this country today, and they all have different interpretations. So the EPA is about to close down. A lot of companies is closing down electrical generating plants. That ripples into coal mining and suppliers to coal mining, conveyor belts, and it's just beginning to disintegrate our economy. So a moratorium on regulation. The other thing to do is just a simple flat rate, border adjusted tax rate. It's difficult for our manufacturers to compete with companies in other countries where they export to us and all the domestic taxes are taken out. Our companies make things, send them overseas with the embedded cost of taxes. It makes it harder for us to compete. So take out all the loopholes for corporate jets and big oil and everything the Obama administration talks about, and let's just have a low flat rate, and everyone should participate. I mean, we can help the poor and create safety nets, but when you have nearly half of Americans who pay no federal income tax, that creates instability in your democracy when half of the people don't care what government costs or how much it spends. So the tax rate would be important. Now, one of the other key things is just open up America's energy supplies. It will create tens of thousands of jobs relatively quickly. We have vast supplies of not just coal and oil, but natural gas. And so many states like South Carolina could benefit from bringing natural gas ashore and with a revenue sharing agreement with the federal government, the money that a lot of states need. So those things alone, just some predictability in the tax rates, the regulation, open up energy, those things would do a lot to get our economy going.
Okay, let me ask about another issue that, in a sense, Congress also kicked this can down the road several times, in fact, immigration. And what's at the forefront right now is the DREAM Act on this. If the administration and Democrats in Congress were to do something substantial for border security, and that were coupled with passage of the DREAM Act, would that satisfy you? Would you be then for it if you coupled it with border security and DREAM Act?
Not as I understand the DREAM Act. Now, I believe we should show compassion to those who are here. The problem we have is when we create benefits to those who've done things illegally, it begins to create more illegal activity. And the fact is now is if you couldn't get a job as an illegal in our country, you couldn't get benefits from the government, it'd be very easy to control our border. But what we've done is create a lot of incentives for folks to get here. If they get here and have a child, that's an American citizen with all the rights and benefits. And we've created federal and state assistance programs that a lot of folks can use once they're here, whether they're legal or not. and we have not really enforced in the workplace legal workers. So there are a lot of things we need to do, but I think going back now and saying, okay, if you came here, if you happen to, your parents came here illegally, and you were brought with them, you weren't born here, you're not an American citizen, but we're going to give you reduced tuition that other Americans are going to pay for. It doesn't work for me, Marvin, because there's so many Americans struggling now to pay their own and to saving for college, and for someone to be rewarded for being here illegally. Now, again, there are ways that I think we can work through this, but I think going from being illegal to one who's getting benefits is just not a good way to run a rule of law country.
What about going from being illegal for people who came in here not actively breaking the law? They came in, you know, their parents brought them in when they were 2 years old or 4 years old.
I think that's what the DREAM Act is talking about. Yeah.
And letting them be free from fear that they're going to be deported at any moment and sent back to a country where it's not their country. I mean, they grew up in America, right, with all of American culture.
Well, clearly we have to work something out for those who are here, particularly those who grew up here and have no country to go home to. But I think bestowing all the rights of citizenship and public benefits is something I'm just going to have to sit down and look at, because that's particularly with the real questions of whether this administration or really control our borders and stop the flow of illegals. Where we are in our economy with so many Americans out of work, to continue a free flow of illegals while making it difficult for temporary workers and high-tech visas to be issued. A lot of the people we need for our economy we're not letting in. And there are literally tens of thousands of people all over the world waiting to come in through a legal process. And so it still bothers me, regardless of the compassion issue, for us to go back and create rewards for people, family members of those who came here illegally.
Let me just pursue this for one more moment. If there were comprehensive immigration reform that included border security, that moved from just having the family basis of bringing in more people to the question of bringing in skilled workers who are needed in our economy, and as part of this, there was the idea that, again, these people who came here as small children and have grown up in America, and not being able, let's not talk about their getting benefits, but just being able to have a driver's license, to have a bank account, to live without fear in that way. Could this be part of?
Yeah, I think it could be. I want to look at the whole proposal, and because there's such a political motive here by the other side, and it always has been. I mean, most of or at least a lot of the workers who come here illegally would prefer to have a temporary type of a visa where they can come back and forth to do work for, whether it's a hospitality industry in the summer, whether it's farming in season, construction. But it's hard. The Democrats won't allow the temporary visas, temporary workers, because they don't vote and they don't join unions. And the same is true for the high-tech workers who come here. Generally are not going to join the unions, and probably are not going to vote Democrat if they vote. And so what we're left with is the Democrats are going to insist in comprehensive reform is some form of amnesty to the 10 or more million who are here to become voters and in many cases union members. To me, what that does to the political dynamic in our country is unacceptable, particularly when you realize how many folks have been trying to do this the legal way. And my office literally has helped hundreds over the years who are trying to navigate the system legally, waiting for years to come, or maybe working here on a green card and wanting to become a citizen. And what we do to those folks, it just is not fair to go back and say, okay, you all came here illegally, we're going to now make you citizens and voters. They're here. I'm not suggesting we round people up, but I think if we make it hard for folks to get a job if they're not legal and to get public benefits, you would find a lot of people going back registering the right way. And for those who are already here, like children who have no home country, we can figure out how to deal with that in a compassionate way. But we do need to be careful not to have incentives for folks to come here.
Okay, let me ask about another program, actually one of the programs of the Bush administration that seems to have been a success as far as saving many millions of lives in Africa, namely the PEPFAR program, which was the President's emergency program to be able to send some medicine for AIDS relief for people who are affected with HIV, and working it through community and religious groups and so forth. There was money appropriated for this. This is one of the areas that may be cut, or there's been discussion of cutting it. Mm-hmm. What do you think about a program like that?
Well, we've had a lot of success with malaria. I mean, I don't think we're going to fix a sexually transmitted disease. Despite the medicine, until there's some cultural reform, which is going to take a while, as you know. And what I found is when the Bush started the program, there at the outset appeared to be good results. We had people focused on the real mission, but when they came back to reauthorize it, they wanted to double it. Okay. And you looked at all the countries it was going to were then spread all over the world. The agencies carrying out were no longer those who were focused on it. And we didn't really have good metrics on outcomes beyond what we got when it first started. So it has become a government program that is growing without real supervision and accountability. And I have very little confidence that we can continue to spend money the way we have with good success. When we focused, for instance, on malaria, and we know that we've got a real cure, and we got good results. But as much as we can move things towards the private sector, and there are a lot of private charities involved that cannot participate because they might have some religious orientation. Unfortunately, despite the good intentions, the harder we try, the worse we do at the federal level.
Okay. When has, I know you are a Republican, you're a conservative, you're a Christian. Mm-hmm. Do these ever come into conflict in some way? When have, let's say, when has there been a particular piece of legislation that if you were not a Christian, you might have supported it because you are a Christian, you opposed it? Any examples like that?
It's not so much a right and wrong or a moral issue many times, but the role of government is always in front of my mind. Okay. And faith is completely voluntary. Government uses force. And I think a lot of Christians in government lose sight of the idea that when God's talking about us to helping the poor, He was not telling us to use the government by force, to take people's money and go out and decide who's going to be helped. He was telling us as believers, as followers of Christ, to help people. And when we go to Washington and use other people's money and start trying to help people by force, it's just not the formula there. So I think as long as I keep in my mind the clear difference between what I do as an individual, as a Christian, as a volunteer, and I was heavily involved in charities and United Way and groups like that before I ran for office. And it's different. United Way is different. We voluntarily take money, we voluntarily work. The government is different. And if we had a track record of good results, but we've spent trillions on poverty programs, and they announced last week that there are more people in poverty than there were 20 years ago. Yeah. So again, there's got to be reasonable outcome, but I'm just convinced that doing things by force, compassion by force, is not a good formula.
Okay. Let me ask just a couple other things, then we'll turn it over to all of you for questions, starting with students first. And this question is actually from my wife, who's one of her peeves is seeing buildings and highways and other things named after living politicians. Mm-hmm. In the Hall of Fame, which is the most important hall any of us can hope to get into, the Baseball Hall of Fame, not me, maybe some of you, you have to be retired for at least 5 years mm-hmm. before you can get in. Should there be a rule that a politician has to be dead for at least 5 years before you can name something after him?
Yeah, there should. I think there may be one now. Okay. But it's been a problem in Congress. I mean, we've had 400 we've had a lot of people in the House and Senate who really think they're there to take home the bacon. And to shut that valve off, I mean, I've become an enemy of a lot in Congress for trying to stop the earmark game. But it's a difference between a federal government that focuses on parochial interest versus what our national interest and constitutional responsibilities. But I don't ever want a road or bridge named after me, and probably won't since I helped stop the earmark process. But I don't think it's a good idea. I see it a lot at the state level, and the government should be about serving others, and creating monuments to ourselves should not be part of the process, unless, like Patrick Henry, a few years after you're gone, you can name a college after yourself.
Okay, one political question. As you've been watching, I suspect, and sometimes enjoying the various presidential candidate debates, who's making good arguments, who's not making good arguments? I'm not asking for particular endorsement or anything, but as you just look at the quality of the argumentation, who impresses you, who doesn't?
Well, I sponsored a forum in South Carolina because I was tired of soundbite answers and gotcha questions. And we got the folks on the stage and asked short questions and allowed them to talk for several minutes. And they had 21, 22 minutes to talk about things. And they could talk about issues that were important to them, but the focus was on America's first principles, constitutional ideas, and how they translated those constitutional ideas into their policies. I learned a lot more about the candidates than I do from any of these debates, because the ones who are asking the questions decide what you get to talk about. And I know from being in a lot of debates myself, it's not unusual to finish the debate and realize you didn't get to talk about what was important to you. But I did learn more about the candidates. I don't want to get into who gave good answers and who hasn't, because that varies. But that time to speak obviously is good for someone like a Newt Gingrich, who's more of a professor and can talk about principles and those concepts and the ideas that are derived from them. But all the candidates had strengths in that format, and that's what I want to watch more. The reason I'm not endorsing early is I haven't heard enough from the candidates, and I really want to hear the candidates who are willing to just tell Americans the truth and be bold about the fact that the government has to do less rather than more, that I can't promise anything in my campaign that this government's going to give you. We have to do less. And I really haven't heard that from the candidates yet.
It's a hard thing politically to be saying, but a true thing. Okay, questions from all of you, and again, these are not the questions like what's your favorite pizza, but questions about some of the principles involved here.
Senator, the Palestinians have demanded or moved in the United Nations in the past week to begin demanding statehood over in the Middle East.
Right.
If you were to advise the president on this issue, sir, in light of his recent loss to the New York Congressional District and whatnot, how would you advise the president to move forward in light of these new demands from Palestine, sir?
Well, I would tell him to veto it and make a point that there should never be a Palestinian state unless the Palestinians recognize Israel's right to exist. Israel accepts a two-state solution, and I've seen them make a lot of compromises to make that work. But despite what you might hear in the media, the Palestinians, those who lead them, have yet to recognize Israel's right to exist. As a matter of fact, many of their leaders have publicly said that they want to destroy Israel. I wouldn't negotiate with someone like that, and they should not be admitted to the United Nations. Israel should not serve in the United Nations with a nation that wants to destroy them.
As other nations like China develop into world superpowers, how do you see the United States' role in the world changing?
Well, that's a big question.
Yeah, you can go with it as you want.
I'll give you my perspective of that. As I've kind of watched what's happened over the last 10 or 20 years, the U.S. trying to transplant democracy, to export freedom, the results are pretty mixed. And the more I've studied, the more I realize how unique America is. And the fact that so many things converged in the early American colonies, and I think the Judeo-Christian beliefs, the focus on individualism, individual responsibility, of folks being accountable to God rather than external forces allowed us to live in a much freer environment than the rest of the world. And as a matter of fact, that focus on the individual relationship with God, it created, I think, an individualistic society that created a free market economy and a culture, I think, that could live without a lot of external force. We have tried to transplant that into countries that don't have the same beliefs, the same institutions, again, with varying degrees of success. And now as I look at where we are as a nation with the debt that we have, and the fact that we're borrowing 42 cents on every dollar we spend in Washington, I realize that we need to do things a different way internationally. I think the best thing we can do for the world, the cause of freedom, is to be that city on the hill, to be that model or that example for the rest of the world, to give what support we can through aid and private charities, missionary work, but to try to go set up democracies around the world, particularly with the type of interventions that we've had, has not had good results. And so I have a little bit different vision in the future of what we need to do, and that's more be strong at home, be able to defend ourselves, be the economic model for the world, get our fiscal house in order, and then make sure that any enemy of the United States is not an enemy very long. That we have the capability to eliminate threats to us and our interests. But as you see China and others become more and more powerful, we need to realize that the debtor is a slave to the lender, and we are a debtor to China. And we are the world's largest debtor. We're in a position now where we have to borrow $120, $140 billion every month just to keep the lights on. That means that we're in a pretty difficult spot when it comes to countries like China and other developing countries that own a lot of our debt. So I think we have to be a lot more responsible fiscally. We have to strengthen the fabric of our culture back home and get our economy back on track and just be a strong nation that supports other nations that believe in freedom, but not necessarily tries to transplant our way of life in other parts of the world where they don't necessarily want it.
You mentioned these getting our financial house in order. Do you believe that the American people have the political will to make those cuts to get our house in order?
I do, because I don't think the American people would feel a lot of it, despite what you hear in the media. If we could, there's so much waste and duplication in our government, literally trillions of dollars. We would shed some government jobs, but the American people would not feel a lack of services in that area. I mean, we could fix Social Security. In fact, we can balance our budget in the next 10 years. Pat Toomey developed a budget that most of us voted for that didn't change Social Security and Medicare in the next 10 years. If we can hold spending near the inflation rate, we can move back towards a balanced budget. But we have to determine that we want to do that. And when the President and others said it was extreme for us to want to balance our budget, all of you who are in college and working for a future, that should frighten you. Because even a fifth grader could tell you, if you're drowning in debt and you keep spending more than you're bringing in, that something really bad is going to happen. And if we don't turn things around pretty quickly, it will. But I think we can get our fiscal house in order without jeopardizing government services to the American people. In fact, if the government quit spending and borrowing, it would create stability and jobs would grow, and I think you'd actually find a lot more tax revenue for folks out there. So yeah, I think for younger workers, I would love to give you a different Social Security and Medicare package, or at least different options. Frankly, I think most of you in the room would take that part of that 12.4% that you'll be paying into Social Security your whole life, and if you could put part of that in a 401k, you'd probably much rather do that than what we've got now, which is not going to be there for you when you retire. So I think we can do it, but the American people are going to be frightened when we do. The media, the AARP, are going to go out and say, oh gosh, if you make any changes to Social Security, you're not going to get your check. And there's been no proposal that affects anyone over 55, but there will be the class warfare, the scare tactics and everything anytime we try to change something, even if it's something you want as a younger worker. So the thing we really need is an informed electorate, an active electorate. That's what I saw happen in 2010, what I wrote a little bit about. I'm convinced Americans can change things if they get active.
Let me ask a question about the two most contentious social issues we have these days, abortion and then also same-sex marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And we seem to be winning the battle on abortion. We have more people becoming pro-life. We seem to be losing the battle concerning same-sex marriage. Any suggestions from your political and marketing understanding of ways to turn that around?
Yeah, I don't think we're losing the marriage issue with the people, but I think in legislatures, in the courts, we are. And I think it's a huge issue when the government starts redefining an institution like that, particularly an institution which I consider a religious institution. Marriage was around a long time before this country was. And for the courts to come in and redefine it for political expediency or whatever their perceived motivation is. There's good evidence around the world and other countries where that's been done, is that that's terrible for your culture. And so I think people are just going to have to be more active and engaged in who they elect. I think we in leadership positions just have to remind people this is more than an issue of just compassion. If you look at the statistics relative to families, married families and children and the outcomes there as opposed to other family models, there's nothing even close. And so we have to restore, I think, a marriage culture, which is related, I think, to a culture of life. We need to take away the government incentives. One of the things we have to do is protect people's right, not just to do what they want, but protect our right to believe things are wrong. And that's one of the things I think a lot of these decisions have made it difficult. There's no longer any societal stigma in doing things wrong. And when folks speak out and say, I don't think that's right, you're likely to be labeled a bigot or something else if you speak to something that you think is moral. But it's more than morality. All you have to do is look at the Center for Disease Control, the statistics, and it's pretty apparent what's a productive, healthy way to go in our culture.
Defense spending as a potential solution to balancing the budget as we seek more fiscal accountability and responsibility. What do you see the way ahead for defense cuts? Is there room for defense cuts? Where should we cut? Where should we not? What is the role for a strong defense in your opinion? And what emphasis should we place on defense cuts as a potential solution to balancing the budget?
Well, the defense of our country is the top priority of the federal government. There's nothing in the Constitution about education, health care, all these other things that we're doing. And the cost of being weak is difficult to estimate. So we have to have a strong modern defense. I think there's a lot of room for removing waste, to kind of revisioning what our military and role in the world should be. And I think as we begin to look at how do we defend our country, protect our borders, look at things like missile defense systems, then I think there are ways for us to perhaps pull back numbers in some areas, but the modernization of our military is going to have to continue. So I'm not one to think that we can actually save a lot of dollars by cutting the military. There's a lot of efficiencies that we can can work on. I think just eliminating earmarks helped. We've been building things that the military didn't want just because they were in somebody's state or congressional district for a while, maintaining planes that'll never fly again because it keeps jobs in somebody's congressional district. If we can get the political influence out and give a clear vision of our role, I don't think there's going to be a lot of savings in defense. Frankly, we're spending a whole lot less than as a percent of our economy than we used to, but there are probably some smarter ways that we can do things. But the new equipment, the drones, particularly anti-missile technology, tactical as well as strategic, there are things we can do to make sure our country is safe, perhaps without a lot of the waste that we've got now.
Thank you for coming, Senator. In the back here. I'm the chairman of College Republicans here, and right now a lot of pundits are saying that there's a huge upsurge in the future for the Republican Party. But a lot of the excitement, Tea Party excitement in 2010 was not mainstream Republican establishment. I know you lead the Senate Conservatives Fund in the Senate Tea Party caucus. How do you see the interaction between the Republican Party and the Tea Party moving forward in the next several years?
Yeah. Well, the Democrat Party and the President desperately need a boogeyman right now, and they are creating that boogeyman under the name of Tea Party. There is no one Tea Party. What this is thousands of groups of active citizens around the country, some with 3 or 4 people in it, some with a couple of hundred. But I've been to a lot of Tea Party meetings. It's not a right-wing group. There are a lot of professional people. There are recovering liberals in the group. There are Democrats, there are libertarians, conservatives. There are people who are just worried about the future of our country, many actually fearful, knowing that the numbers just don't add up. You just can't keep spending at the rate we're spending, borrowing money. People are concerned, and they want to return to more of a constitutional limited government. So, yeah, they're being vilified, demonized by the media. Everywhere I go now, it's called this will be called a Tea Party meeting. I can guarantee you by the reporters that are here. And I had a forum in South Carolina. Not one Tea Party leader, as far as I know, was involved with it, but it was called a Tea Party forum. So they're doing everything they can to blame the downgrade on the Tea Party, the debt. All this is what we should have in our country, is active citizens who are trying to take their government back. Yeah, the media called me Senator Tea Party, but I'm not the leader of the Tea Party. I'm trying to be a voice for those Americans who believe in constitutional limited government, the basic principles of American exceptionalism, and I'm trying to be that voice inside the Senate. But I'm very thankful for active citizens, and you can't label them under one label and expect it to stick, because everywhere I go, the composition of Tea Party is very different. But they are what Benjamin Franklin meant when he said, "You have a republic if you can keep it." What he was saying is, if you keep the power of this government in your hands as a people, we'll keep a republic. But what's happened is all the power has been concentrated in Washington, and it's destroying America. We need to take it back, and that's what I'm very thankful for. Grassroots activism, Tea Parties, patriot groups, whatever you call them, they're making a difference.
Let me ask about another ideological strain within the GOP. Ayn Rand, the philosopher and novelist, seems to have developed a strong following among some members of Congress, in fact assigning their staffs to read her novels, which those of you familiar with, they are filled with action and colorful characters, The Fountainhead, Atlas Shrugged, and so forth, but they're also filled with a lot of anti-Christian propaganda.
Sure.
And so I'm just wondering about that. Is it because it's a defense of capitalism? What else is going on, and why are some congressional leaders assigning this for people to read?
Well, I think it matches up with some libertarian philosophy, and actually I'm very comfortable debating libertarians because their focus is on the individual. I think it's somewhat misguided to not understand the spiritual component or the cultural component of fiscal issues. I mean, our biggest fiscal issues in Washington are related to the deterioration of our culture. And it doesn't take a lot of study. Of course, you've done a lot, but it's pretty obvious what happens when compassion goes awry. But with the country drowning in debt, the debate needs to be between libertarians and conservatives right now. And while I may disagree on some of where the libertarians come down, their focus does begin with the individual and individual autonomy and freedom. What we need to add to that as conservatives is the fact that all through history, if you look at it, the way to restrain the individual in a constructive way, it doesn't come from the force of government, but it comes from that faith component that we've seen throughout the history of America. I'm very comfortable in the debate with libertarians.
Okay, so I saw a hand going up. We have just a couple minutes left. Yes.
Senator DeMint, you talked about your experience arriving on Capitol Hill and discovering that so many of the senators and congressmen who had these great ideas and goals that they talked about during the election process, all of a sudden they get on Capitol Hill and that's no longer what they're working for.
Right.
All of a sudden, what they're consumed with is making their constituents happy and getting reelected. And I wanted to ask you, because in the most recent installment of the debt crisis during the summer, when it seemed like the nation was, heading toward default, we saw something different. We saw a number of people on Capitol Hill, Republicans, being unwilling to compromise, standing their ground, and not being willing to give in. And the media painted them as, the media painted them in a very bad light for that and tried to blame all sorts of things on them for being unwilling to give in to the pressures.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, is that going to come back to bite them in the future? Is that going to be something that's going to hurt them, or do you think that the American people will recognize that as something honorable?
Well, it really depends. You said we didn't compromise, but the fact is, they said we couldn't pass anything as Republicans in the House. But we came up with a proposal we call cut, cap, and balance, which cut some spending this year, it capped spending to close to inflation over 10 years, and sent a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution back to the states to ratify. And we gave the President the debt limit increase that he wanted, nearly $2.5 trillion. That was a compromise in my mind. Let's handle the immediate crisis, but let's do something rational over the next 10 years and try to move towards a balanced budget. Now, the fact that they call that extreme, again, should frighten you. And the fact that you perceive that as not compromising frightens me. It's hard to get the message out of what really is happening in Washington. The media told you we weren't compromising, and apparently that's what you took from it. But we went to great pains to demonstrate to the country that we were not trying to create a default, that we were willing to increase the debt limit, but that we needed to make this the last time we did. Because frankly, I don't even think we can borrow $2.5 trillion, much less the $10 trillion that we've got in our plan over the next 10 years. So that is going to be what this election is about. Do you and people like you around the country believe that you've got these radical Republicans controlled by these anarchist Tea Party folks, or do you want to support a president who is trying to do good things for our country? The choices are going to be, it's going to take some discernment. And I can tell you, and I've said it a lot, and I think it's true, the Democrats think most Americans are stupid. They'll say the sun is up when you know it's down. And our border's secure when you know it's not. The stimulus is working. Obamacare is going to lower the cost of your health care. Dodd-Frank's going to make credit easier. If you believe all of that, our country's in trouble because the facts are completely the opposite. So it's up to us, not just as Republicans, but as thinking Americans, to try to get the truth out and let people see what's really going on. Because there's nothing radical about a balanced budget. There's nothing radical about citizen activism or people who think borrowing money to run our country is a good idea. So I'm going to keep appealing to what I believe are the senses of the American people and hope that we still have 51% who understand and care about freedom. That's what this election is going to be about. Are there 51% of Americans who know better, who are willing to be active and vote? I believe there are, if they come out and vote. But I think only 29% of Americans over 18% voted in the last election, and that was supposed to be a big earthquake election. 70% voted in Iraq, and they were risking their lives. So America will be free, but they won't be if you leave it to the people who I'm working with in Washington.
Good note on which to conclude. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mark.